the mouse. There it is. All right, let's go, y'all. Oh, does this not work? That's why we have a backup. Nope, we're going to do it keyboard style. Our story begins in 1991. Fresh Prince Season 1 is in full swing. Side ponytails are all the rage. And the internet has just seen its very first web page. And this is it. You can still visit it today. It is written by someone named Tim Berners-Lee. This is a name you should all know because he's the father of a few things you may have heard of, maybe. Namely, HTML, web browsers, URLs, HTTP, the World Wide Web. Ever heard of it? He's also a knight, so that's cool. But while this page is academically, historically, metaphysically fascinating, let's be honest, it's a little boring. At least compared to modern standards. And that's because the web was a little boring, right? It didn't sing, it didn't dance, it was just static. This is where our story begins, friends. The story of JavaScript. How did it go from being a cute little toy language to one that would ultimately transform the shape of the internet? Dare I say world? Maybe not. But before we dive into that, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Annie Sexton, as Jason said. I have primarily worked in developer tooling and platforms as a service. I used to work at Heroku, back in the heyday, then Render, now Fly.io. Are we noticing a pattern? This is what they pay me money to do. I make YouTube videos, educational, entertaining video content on all sorts of technical topics. So be sure to check out the Fly.io YouTube channel. I promise only like 25% of it is me trying to sell you things. I also have my own YouTube channel. This is just for fun. No one pays me any money for this, where I like to talk about machine learning. So if you're interested in finding, simple explanations for really complex topics like neural networks or tokenization or byte pair encoding or other nerdy things, be sure to check that out. And smash that like button. Sorry, obligated. Let's talk about web browsers. There weren't that many to begin with because, there weren't that many people on the web. The very first one was called World Wide Web, written by Timmy over here. But for the most part, the web was not widely utilized. It was mostly for academics, researchers, nerds. But then in 1994, a new browser came on the scene, and they called it Netscape Navigator. And by the following year, it held 80% of the web browser market share. Now, Microsoft saw this, and it got a little jealous. And it said, I shall squash them. And so the following year, they come out with their own browser, and they call it Internet Explorer. Your move, Netscape. Now remember what the web was like back then, right? Pretty static. But one day, our very static web would be visited by a magical blue fairy. A blue fairy whose name was Brendan Eich. Brendan began his career in operating system development. And when Netscape decided to poach him, they were like, hey, Brendan, buddy, you wouldn't mind building us an entire programming language right before the launch of Netscape 2.0? Well, Brendan, he was a bit of a language nerd. And he was like, ooh, can I base it on Lisp? And they were like, no, Brendan, you cannot base it on Lisp. JavaScript was almost Lisp, you guys. But he did it. Brendan wrote that little language for Netscape 2.0. And he built it in how many days? 10 days. 10 days. Very good, children. He wrote a little thing called Mocha. But nobody liked that name, so they called it LiveScript. But nobody liked that name. But there was another language that was very popular at the time, right? Came out around the exact same time. And my friends, this is how we came to the name JavaScript. It was literally just a marketing ploy, a decision that would never cause any confusion whatsoever, right? Now, Internet Explorer saw how much Netscape was blowing up, and it got jealous, and it said, I want a JavaScript too, Daddy. So, in 1996, Microsoft released IE 3.0, which came with support for JScript, which was just JavaScript by a different name. Except for there were slight differences. So much so that developers had to write things one way for Netscape Navigator and another way for Internet Explorer. Don't we love that? And it's around this time that we enter the era known as the browser wars. The browser wars are when Netscape Navigator and IE, technically this is the first browser war, we're not even going to get into the second. This is when IE and Netscape are duking it out for the heart and soul of the internet. And one of my favorite anecdotes, sorry, that was loud, is when IE4 was released, Microsoft decided to pull a prank on their top competitor by placing a 10-foot-tall IE logo on the lawn of the Netscape headquarters. Shots fired. Well, a few hours later, the Netscape folks were like, all right, let's go. So they knock over the logo, put their little Mozilla guy on top, right? Vandalize the whole thing. Having their mascot hold the poster that said, Netscape 72, Microsoft 18, which was the relative market share for each browser. Booyah. So, we've got all these differences between these two browsers. But in 1997, JavaScript was submitted to ECMA International. And this is when our little language became the standard known as ECMAScript. If it's not completely clear what the difference here is, let me explain. JavaScript is to Velcro, stick with me, as ECMAScript is to hook and loop. In that it's a trademark that no one remembers as a trademark. Sorry, Oracle, use it or lose it. Now, ECMAScript did help ease some of the differences between these two standards, right? But there were still plenty of differences. For one thing, they had different ways of accessing and manipulating elements on the page. You see, there was no standard for working with parts of the HTML document as objects. But then, in 1998, DOM Level 1 became an official W3C recommendation. Hooray, standards, right? That fixes everything. Except for not really, because standards take a long time to adopt, and by this time, we're coming to the end of the 20th century and the end of the browser wars. And we all know which browser won. Opera, just kidding. By 2002, IE held over 90% of the web browser market share. I mean, having it ship with Windows was kind of an easy win. Here's the thing. Microsoft was doing some really clever stuff at this point. Really clever stuff that would change JavaScript forever. What you have to remember during this time is that whenever you wanted to fetch new data from the server, guess what? That would cost a whole new page reload. But 1998 was the year that Microsoft developed the concept behind XMLHttpRequest. I say concept behind because the syntax was a little different, but the idea was the same. It gave us a way to, hold on to your hats, asynchronously fetch data from the server without requiring a page reload. Imagine that. In 2005, this practice was given a name by the web designer Jesse James Garrett, and he called it Ajax. asynchronous, JSON, and XML. Of course, these days we mostly use JSON, right? I want you to remember that Ajax is the development pattern, not the technology. The technology looked like this. This was the technology upon which all single-page applications would be built. This is when Ajax, early 2000s, Ajax was blowing up. And you can still write code like this today, and it works. And if you're like, I'd rather not, you wouldn't be alone. And in fact, around this time is also when we start to see a rise in libraries that aimed at making JavaScript just a little nicer to write. And the fairest one of all, my friends, was named jQuery. jQuery was the queer eye for JavaScript. It took one look at this, and it said, oh no, we can do better. Look at that, mwah, chef's kiss, so much better. Of course, it wasn't just Ajax requests, right? It was all sorts of things. jQuery was built on the premise that writing JavaScript should be fun. And honestly, for a time, I think they accomplished that. I cannot underemphasize the impact that this little library had. Even to this day, nearly 80% of websites still use jQuery. You want to know what percentage of websites use React? 4.7. Crazy, right? Now, the early aughts, as I said, this is when we start to see a rise in single-page applications. But despite this innovation, JavaScript was still largely considered to be a toy language by serious developers. The reality is, JavaScript was kind of slow. And with people building these ever-complex interactions on the web, it could really bog things down. But then, in 2008, something huge came out. Oh, sorry, not that. Not that, no. No. Yeah, close enough. Google introduced the V8 JavaScript engine, which used just-in-time compilation. Not only did it provide 2 full servings of vegetables, no. It also allowed JavaScript to be compiled to machine code at runtime. Now, how it actually works behind the scenes is beyond the scope of this conversation, but needless to say, it was fast, right? V8 was built for Google Chrome, and it was the first engine to use just-in-time compilation. Other browsers would soon follow suit, with SpiderMonkey for Firefox and JavaScript Core for Safari. But the biggest impact that V8 had on the JavaScript world is when Ryan Dahl used it to create a new JavaScript runtime environment, one that ran outside of the browser. What? JavaScript on the back end, all of a sudden, JavaScript was a real programming language. You could build full-stack applications entirely in JavaScript, and this idea was distilled by a quote that became known as Atwood's Law. Raise your hand if you know Atwood's Law. You're going to know now. Atwood's Law states that anything that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. One of us. All right. Now here's the thing. Despite things picking up on the back end, things on the front end were getting a little messy. A little messy, right? Raise your hand if you had to build jQuery apps. Yeah, oh, so all these people with their hands raised have scars. I still have nightmares about the spaghetti code that I had to wade through. It was all my own code. I have no one to blame. But during the 2010s, a lot of things changed. This is when we got a lot of new libraries and frameworks that aim to address this complexity. I feel like the reputation of the JavaScript community for being a little fickle came about during this time. But here's the deal. After dealing with the hot mess that were jQuery apps, frameworks like these were a godsend. All of a sudden, you weren't having to think of DOM elements as DOM elements. They were components. Things were more semantic, better organized. It was easier to manage state. And with these ever-sophisticated libraries came tools to support them. Tools like task runners. Task runner. Do we have any? Okay, between gulp and grunt. Grunt people? Gulp people? All right, I think gulp wins. These could do all sorts of things, like transpile your Sass to CSS, minify your scripts and style sheets, optimize images, provide linting, and concatenate your files. You need to realize this is a weird thing that only JavaScript really did. All right? Concatenation has largely fallen out of favor, and with good reason, because you're just squishing all of your JavaScript files into one file and hoping and praying that you have loaded them in the right order, and there's no like conflicting versions of things. It's not a great solution. Other languages are a little more sophisticated with this, right? Python has requirements.txt, Ruby has gem files, lots of languages have some kind of manifest. They have a way of managing their dependencies. And this all started to become possible when we got first CommonJS for Node, and then ES modules later on. And all around this time, it's these module systems that allowed us to start to use bundlers. Bundlers were the solution to concatenation, right? It would just take care of your dependencies, load them in the right order. You don't sit back, have a drink, you're good, right? It was wonderful. I'll be honest, I completely forgot that Browserify, which was one of the most popular bundlers, forgot that its logo was so Wingardium Leviosa, but Browserify was great. But the thing is, it only did bundling. It only did bundling. Everything else would be handled by a task runner. But then, in 2014, things shifted. First of all, Taylor Swift stopped pretending to be a country western singer. Sorry, I realized I had stopped putting like pop culture references in my slides. I had to throw something in there. We also got Webpack. I don't like Webpack. But its impact on the JavaScript world is undeniable. Because not only could it do everything that a task runner could do, and Browserify could do, it could do more, right? For one thing, it could handle ES modules. It supported tree shaking, code splitting, caching, hot module reloading, style sheet stuff, all in one neat little package. Very impactful. Now, between 2015 and 2020, we're getting close to the modern era, we saw a lot of modernization. And frankly, I don't have time to go into every single one of them, so we're just going to list them off. Ready? Here we go. We got let const, arrow functions, async await, promises, spread operators. She's a spread operator. Package managers, TypeScript, WebAssembly, Dino. But I think the most impactful changes that we saw during this time were not to the language itself or any framework, but rather JavaScript's involvement in a big change in how developers approached architecture. And of course, I'm talking about serverless functions. JavaScript was the first language to be used for serverless, and with good reason, right? Node.js has a relatively fast startup time. It's a lightweight runtime. It's very widely used, and it's event-driven. It's great for the job. I don't think that serverless would have seen the success that it did had they chosen a different language to start with. And I'm not even saying you should use serverless functions. I happen to work for a company, Fly.io, where you can deploy apps. This is going to start to sound like an ad, I promise it's not. You can deploy apps to the web, and they run on a virtual machine. But not just any virtual machine, a Firecracker VM. Who's heard of Firecracker? Okay, we got one. Kent, you're cheating, because I... Firecracker was developed by AWS Lambda for their serverless functions. Those things that spin up and down your code so fast, those are Firecracker VMs. Super, super lightweight virtual machines, and that's what Fly offers. We just happen to offer them in the form of just the VM. They just stay there, right? And I only bring that up to point out that even we are not outside the scope of influence of JavaScript. Even we were built on the shoulders of these giants. So what's next? Well, my friends, it's at this point that we have to talk about AI. AI is changing how developers build things, as well as non-developers. I'll be the first one to admit, I have mixed feelings about this. I have mixed feelings. On the one hand, I can build things faster than ever. I use AI agents all the time when I'm building my software. I think they are incredible. I do read the code that it spits out. I want to know how these things work. But it's incredibly fast, and this is for somebody who has spent over a decade of her career writing software the old-fashioned way, with my fingies. But on the other hand, if you let them, these agents will just make decisions for you, right? If you want to, you can just delegate a lot of decision-making to them. And not to say that every decision needs to be held up to the utmost scrutiny, but what will happen to innovation if we just continue to accept the suggestions that these AI agents give us? No shade to Next.js. This is punching up. So I decided to ask a friend of mine, who will remain nameless because I didn't ask him to be in this talk. He is a long-time open source contributor, now retired, what he thought about this, because he is 100% on board with AI agents for coding. This is somebody who will forget more about programming than I will ever know. And I was like, what do you think? I brought to him my worries about, hey, with all these people just vibe coding things into existence, just accepting whatever it suggests, isn't innovation gonna crawl to a stop, or at least slow? And he said, no, I'm not really worried about that. And when we started to talk about it, I realized there was a perfect analogy for this, for his reasons. The perfect analogy. Squarespace. Oh God, she really is a YouTuber. Hashtag not sponsored. Squarespace empowers. What if I was like, check my affiliate link? Squarespace empowers you to build blogs, portfolios, e-commerce sites, all sorts of things, all without needing to know any code. It's like WordPress's hot cousin, right? But it has its limits. It has its limits. You can't do everything on Squarespace. You can do a lot, but not everything. Raise your hand if you have used an AI agent to write code. Yeah. So all of you know the pain that is typing in a little prompt and then being like, ah, cool, thanks, Claude. That's not remotely what I asked for. That's not to downplay what these tools can do. As I said, I use it all the time. I find them incredibly useful. You do have to watch what they're doing. But the more you relinquish power, the more decisions you have it make, no matter what, there are going to be limits to what it can do. The more you relinquish control of, the more limits there will be. That's just how it is, right? Hopefully, as AI gets better, those limits will decrease, but they will always be there. And as such, because there will always be limits, there will always also need to be people who are still in the weeds, making those important changes to the language, to the framework. If anything, AI has the potential to speed up progress in innovation and progress in JavaScript. Has the potential being the key word. We are still responsible for deciding what matters, deciding what to build, what trade-offs to make. And a great way to sharpen that judgment is to look back. The best way, when you understand the history of a certain technology, you start to understand the specific problems that it was trying to solve. And this helps us better evaluate modern tools for our specific problems. You see, learning about programming history isn't just an academic curiosity. It's essential. It gives us essential context that makes us better developers. If you guys would like to follow me, thank you very much. If you would like to follow me, these are the YouTube channels I mentioned before. I'm also on Blue Sky. Please sure to check me out. But thank you all so much, and enjoy the conference.